women up here some probing questions because of what they would have said, engage. Don't wait for a moment to be called upon. 2 hours is very little. It's going to fly very soon. So make sure that we get the best that we can get out of you. There is also a reason why the foundation is hosting this event. We are the foundation that represents both Oliver and Adelaide Tambo. Now tonight we will at some point even refer to Mom Adelaide, because much as she was the partner to OR, she was an activist in her own right. And she's the backbone that made it possible for OR to fight the battle that he fought, because the home was intact, the family was safe, and the family was a base for the ANC to go back there and refresh as they crisscross the world and go past London. So we will also talk about Mom Adelaide. But as a foundation, we're beginning to say, what sort of work should we be doing in South Africa of today to continue the fight for the emancipation of women? We haven't answered that question for ourselves. And we're hoping we will be challenged by yourselves. You will throw things at us, you will give ideas, especially towards the end when we've had it all, that we will be able to take. And come the beginning of next year, we will be networking and probably partnering with some of you in the room to make sure that we deliver that. So with that said, I really encourage you and welcome you here tonight and say the stage is ours and we are all going to use it, and we are very safe. We've got some men folk in the room with us who are here to learn, listen, and go spread the word, because this battle is not the battle of the one gender, but it is a collective that needs to win it. I have to say, before we even go far, that it's always difficult to put any event together. And as women, we know how to stretch the 10 rand. So we took the 10 rand that we had, and we've waved it in front of various entities and said, look, I have 10 rands. If you bring 2 rand, it's going to be 12 rands. And the Department of Science and Technology jumped and said, we're going to help you. So the food we're going to enjoy at the end of this function has been generously sponsored by the Department of Science and Technology. And to Mam Naledi Pandor, we say thank you so much. She is traveling. She was meant to be here with us tonight, but she couldn't come. But guess what? We are women, and we like enjoying fruits. So we've made sure that we've got the red and the white grapes. So also when we leave this room, we are definitely going to eat healthy and have some red and white grapes. The only downside, they've been kept in a bottle for a long time. And those grapes have been made possible by another dynamic group called Thokozani. It's an empowerment wine group supported by Demir Stahl in the Cape. The Sonneberg family gave 80% of their business to their staff, and they maintained 20%. So the staff are now running with the show. The story gets nicer because the Sonneberg family, they don't have children, and they were worried about their legacy and said, if we pass on, who's going to look after our legacy? And guess who they trusted with that legacy? Their children. Just like OR trusted all of us with his legacy. So I'll go on later and tell you about other partners that helped us make tonight possible. But I just had to make sure that I mentioned the grapes, because then we're going to be more motivated to go on for the night. Without much ado, I'm going to hand over. My job is done. But I'm handing over to a dynamic young woman who's going to facilitate us for the evening. And that is none other than Atambile Masola. Now, Atambile comes from the Eastern Cape, went on to work and live in Cape Town as an English teacher, studied, ended up with a master's in education, very passionate around gender, women history studies, and has carried on with that line. Ended up and of course, she studied as a Mandela Rhodes Scholar, so that says something about Atambile. She ended up at the University of Pretoria as a lecturer, and she's now busy with her PhD. She is the person who's going to make sure that we all engage and that we hear a lot from the stalwarts. She's very skilled, amazing, and when I saw her, I thought she was 16 years old. I hand over to you, Atambile, for the evening.
Good evening, everybody. I hope you are as excited as I am about being here. Sanbonani and Diniva, good evening. Good, you're all here. It's such a pleasure to be here amongst such esteemed women. I've been raving about this all week, and I've been nervous about it all week because it's about making us, shine and look good and have a great time for all of us. And as Linda has already said, this is a conversation. We're not doing a lecture. I'm not going to give a lecture. We're here to just enjoy each other's company because I think that's what women do well when they're in each other's company. And I think great things happen when women gather. So I want to start with a poem in honor of this being Women's Month and all. And it's a poem that I've been coming back to over and over again these past few weeks because it speaks to where we are right now as a country, I think, and where we've come from historically. And it's a poem by Makhosazana Xaba, and it's called Tongues of Their Mothers. And she's amazing. I'm going to try not to fangirl her too much, but it is Women Crush Wednesday. So I'm Women Crushing Wednesday on Makhosazana Xaba because she's my fave. So the poem is called Tongues of Their Mothers. I wish to write an epic poem about Sarah Baartman, one that will be silent on her capturers, torturers, and demolishers. It will say nothing of the experiments and the laboratories and the displays, or even the diplomatic dabbles that brought her remains home, eventually. This poem will sing of the Gumtoos Valley holding imprints of her baby steps. It will contain rhymes about the games she played as a child. Stanzas will have names of her friends, her family, her community. It will borrow from every single poem ever written about her, conjuring up her wholeness, her voice, dreams, emotions, and thoughts. I wish to write an epic poem about Mangai Jamazulu, one that will be silent on her nephew, Shaka, and her brother, Senzangakon. It will not even mention Nandi. It will focus on her relationship with her sisters, Mawa and Mama, her choice not to marry, her preference not to have children, and her power as a ruler. It will speak of her assortment of battles, strategies, and her charisma as a leader. It will render a compilation of all the pieces of advice she gave to men of Abaqulusi who bowed to receive them, smiled to thank her, but in public never acknowledged her, instead called her a mad witch. I wish to write an epic poem about Daisy Magiwane, one that will be silent on her father, the Reverend Elijah. It will focus on her relationship with her sister Cecilia and the conversations they had in the privacy of the night, how they planned to make history and defy convention. It will speak of the language of algebra, geometry, and trigonometry, then switch to news reports, reviews, and editorials. It will enmesh the logic of numbers with the passion that springs from the words. Capturing her unique brand of pioneer for whom the country was not yet ready. I wish to write an epic poem about Princess Magogo Constance Zulu, one that will be silent on her son, Gacha Mangosuthu Buthelezi. It will focus on her music and the poetry in it, the romance and the voice that carried it through us. It will describe the dexterity of her music-making fingers and the rhythm of her body grounded on valleys, mountains, and musical rivers of the land of Amazulu. It will find words to embrace the power of her love songs that gave women dreams and fantasies to wake up and hold on to a language of love in the dialect of their own mothers. I wish to write an epic poem about Victoria Mxenge, one that will be silent on her husband Griffiths. It will focus on her choice to flee from patients, bedpans, and doctors. This poem will flee from the pages and find a home in the sky. It will float below the clouds, automatically changing fonts and sizes and translating itself into languages that match each reader. It is a poem that will remind people of Gqongqe, that her umbilical cord fertilized their soil. It will remind people of Umlazi, that her blood fertilized their soil. It will remind her killers that we shall never, ever forget. I wish to write an epic poem about Nomvula Glen Rosenbata, one that will be silent on my father, her husband, Reuben Benjamin Xaba. It will focus on her spirit, one that refused to fall to pieces, rekindling the fire she made from ashes no one was prepared to gather. This poem will raise the departed of Magogo, Ngutu, Ngundlovan, Inanda, Hilltown, Utrecht, Kwambande, Ndaleni, and Ashdown, so that they can sit around as it glows and warm their hands while they marvel at this fire she made from ashes no one was prepared to gather. These are just some of the epic poems I wish to write about women of our world in the tongues of their mothers. I will present the women in forms that match their foundations, using metaphors of moments that defined their beings and similes that flow through our seasons of eternity. But I am not ready to write these poems. So as you say, this is a conversation, and I'm going to get straight into it without any further preliminaries. And I want to start with the elders, if you don't mind me saying. Mam Shope and Frini, she said I could call her Frini, not Dr. Jinwala. And I really just want to get a sense of the anecdotes and the stories and the experiences that you have had. And in my mind, I think of you as before 94 and after 94, because you've seen it all. And 94 is that moment, I guess, that we were all waiting for. And really just to speak to the experiences and the work that you did alongside Adelaide, alongside Utadu OR. And perhaps I want to just read something that Mam Shope, actually someone said, you said, I found. And Cheryl Walker, in a paper that she writes about motherhood, she writes about you and says, women bring life to this world, and they have a duty to make sure that this life is preserved and protected. There is a need for us to come together, regardless of our color, to look at the situation in the country and respond as women and mothers. And I just want to get a sense of, how does your identity as a mother kind of push you towards the work that you did in the struggle, if we can call it that? There's a mic in front of you. Can you help us? Thanks.
Thank you, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We are very happy and very proud to be among you today, because it only shows that, you know, we are all aiming at a better life for all. Now, I'll tell you something. I'll give you a very short story, not a story actually, just a talk about myself, as she has said. I don't know where I should start, you know, because it may be too long.
No, go for it. Not too long. We've got amazing women here who want to share.
Pardon?
Keep going.
No, but do I start before I got married when I was still young, or what?
That's a very good question. Start where you want to start. What makes you feel comfortable? Because it's a story that you want to tell.
Okay. Well, anyway, I started as a student like everybody else in KZN, and then I started teaching there again. But because of the weather, I had to change and come and work in Johannesburg. So I worked in Johannesburg at Pimville High. Very unfortunately, it was just at the time when Bantu education was being introduced. So the three of us, myself, Henry Makoti, and Huddleston, we decided to leave. Fortunately, during my course of study, I had also studied a bit of spinning and weaving, which works with people who are disabled. So Coronation Hospital offered me a post where I worked with the patients, both bedridden and those who needed to exercise their limbs, you know, both. We were spinning and weaving, using our limbs, our arms and our legs.
I don't want to disturb. Can you speak to the mic? Can you hold it up? Your mic.
Sorry. Anyway, I left that place when I joined the African National Congress. I had been an ANC member all along, but under very quiet conditions. So in the end, when I saw that, you know, I've worked enough with Coronation Hospital, I wanted to do something. Then I became very active in politics. And unfortunately, as you all know, once you become very active, then, I don't want to say the enemy, the opposition will come and want to, you know, block your way. So, because things were difficult for me, and policemen came to me now and again, and my husband had already gone out of the country, and my children were with my mother in Mafeking, it was a bit difficult for me. So in the end, I was advised that I must go into exile. So on the 12th of February 1966, I left for exile, leaving the children and everybody else behind, let alone the house. So when I got to Botswana, I stayed there for about, just about more than a year. And then I was asked that I should get all the children to come to me and we should go outside the country. So my children came, the two came first, and then the eldest came later. But I waited for them all. And then in 1967, we traveled to Lusaka. That was that is where we stayed for some time. And then after that, during that time, my husband was in Czechoslovakia. He was representing the African trade unions in Czechoslovakia at the trade union headquarters. So we got there, the children went to school in the language of Czech. And of course, I did my English, but I had to learn how to work in the office. I didn't know how to type, but I had to teach myself because I sort of became his secretary who was not paid. So we worked and worked and worked and worked. During the course of our time in Czechoslovakia, I was very much engaged with women's things because I was very much attached to our organization. I kept on getting instructions, both from OR himself, who was our leader, and then of course from the women's, because I belonged to the women also. So as time went on, in 1981, OR felt that, you know, the women must also be brought together and work officially. So in 1981, the women who were outside South Africa, both of them, all those who were in London, in all other parts where they had gone to, we came together, we assembled in Rwanda, and then we had the first women's conference of the ANC women outside the country. And that is where OR played a very, very important role because he led us into it, he guided us, he told us what to do, what not to do, and among other things, he said we should form...
Mama, tell us a bit more what he said.
Pardon?
Tell us a bit more what he said.
I must tell you what he said. Oh, well, among other things, OR was very, very strict to both men and women to let us know that the struggle of women is not being fought for by women alone, it's from both men and women alike. He also said to us that you women, you've got a very bad habit. You've got a thing of thinking that, you know, your role belongs to the kitchen. Your role does not belong to the kitchen, it belongs to the front line of struggle. And of course, we kept on listening and telling us. Now, this thing of preparing for the conference was just the foundation of that. Because he said to us that, you know, if there's something that is not proper, is to make what he used to call revolutionary declarations. He said we must not dwell on revolutionary declarations, we must work on practical declarations.
Sure.
And of course, we were learning all the time as we are saying that. Now, during the course of that time, one of the things that OR taught us was that, you know, we should keep in touch with women of other countries on the continent first and foremost, and then women abroad, you know, as time goes on. He also said that we should keep very, very much in touch with the women at home because we are one with them. We must discuss our issues. We must know their problems. They must know our problems. They must report to us what has happened at home so that now when we go to the outside countries, we should know what to tell the people and tell the people what is the truth.
Sure, thanks, Ma'am Shope. I'd really like to hear from Frini as well. I'd like to hear from Frini as well about her experience during that time.
Pardon?
I'm saying I'd like to hear from Frini as well, from her experience during that time, because you've written about your experiences about being in the movement and the complexity of being in the movement, which is described by Mam Shope as well. And in something that you wrote, a paper that you wrote in Agenda in 1990, where you map out the position of women who work in the ANC and within the ANC. And I just like the quote that you mentioned there, is that the absence of women from political institutions does not necessarily lead to their absence in the political arena. The ways in which women worked with and in the ANC is complex. And you kind of describe and map out the relationship of women in the ANC around that time, from the 1912 to the 1940s. And I mean, you said you're a historian, so part of that experience, but for you, how did you position yourself within the ANC in light of what Mam Shope has described for us?
Well, I thought I was going to talk about OR, not about me.
You can do that too, and I think the two stories come together
anyway,
beautifully, as Mam Shope showed.
Perhaps I can describe myself as the first exile.
And the travel agent of the ANC.
And the travel, oh, you've been watching. Yes, the times I worked in the ANC as a travel agent and all sorts of things, getting people in and out. And my first passenger, if I can call him that, was Oliver Tambo, because I was asked to help. The ANC had planned on an external mission in anticipation of being banned. And this was probably in around 1952, and this is 8 or 9 years before we were formally banned. And in anticipation, the ANC constitution was changed. They provided for a deputy president, and the deputy president who was elected then was Oliver Tambo. And they had decided, the executive, to send him out of the country because they did anticipate that, given the history, that they were about to be banned. And so this had been arranged. I was unaware of this. I heard about it afterwards. And I was asked, because I had worked with students in London. I was studying law. And the African students had come together in different ways, in different formations, but working with British, particularly the Labour Party, to try and support the decolonization of the continent or of the British Empire. A lot of students were in London, and we were all mobilized in African student associations, also in actually women's organizations. We worked with progressive British organizations. So I was familiar with Africa, and casually had mentioned that Tanganyika was about to be its own history, which I won't go into, because it was unique, having been a German colony, then a UN trust territory. We would now have a nearer border to South Africa, because people who were trying to leave South Africa had to go through the Central African Federation. Roy Walensky was sending them back. And there was a very famous case of a South African who was sent back as journalist. So this was the context of 58, 59, 60. I came back to, having qualified to set up a legal practice, came back, was looking around for chambers in South Africa. I had intentions of staying here. I think I stayed here for 2 months before I went into exile, if I can call it that. Basically, I was asked to help Oliver go out of the country and arrange for sanctuary for us in the nearest territory that wouldn't send us back. And that happened to be Tanganyika. But, you know, why Tanganyika is a separate issue. But I managed to communicate with people I knew in Tanganyika, and I was told nobody would be sent back. And this is Julius Nyerere, who later became president of Tanganyika. Tanganyika was not independent, but I was assured that if we could get there, and remember we had to cross the entire Central African Federation to get there, we would have sanctuary. And I was blissfully ignorant of what was involved, thinking, oh, it's fine, I'll come back and start my legal practice. I never did, never have. But anyway, with that, and it's another story, but I was informed very late that the person who was coming out was Oliver Tambo. I did not know at that time. I had assumed incorrectly that it would be Chief Luthuli, because in ANC tradition, the people who speak for the organization historically have always been the presidents, not the secretary generals. So, and at the last minute, I was suddenly met with Walter Sisulu to tell him that we would get sanctuary. And there was this gentleman sitting there, and I was introduced to Oliver Tambo, you see, and then told by Walter Sisulu that he would be coming out. So anyway, story of how we got him out is another one. We would leave that out. But I got out first, in a sense, just a few hours before, because he and Oliver Tambo and others went to Bechuanaland, as it was then. And I went out through Salisbury, of all places, into Dar es Salaam, and met them there, because we'd arranged charter flights. And I think I want to pay tribute to the church in South Africa and in Britain, because this entire thing was, they assisted us all the way, including financially, to charter planes to come out of South Africa and to fly people to Europe, the leaders. So this was Father Huddleston here, and also Canon Collins, the Dean of St. Paul's Cathedral in London. So these were bodies that were assisting the ANC, but all South Africans who were trying to struggle. And they were part of the struggle in the country itself. So going on from there, as I said, I met Oliver at the last moment and flew out just ahead of them by commercial flight and met them in Dar es Salaam. Once I had informed the Tanganyikans that they were coming, Julius Nyerere went to, Tanganyika was not independent. He went to the British Governor General and said South African leaders were coming in the next morning, and he was insistent in no circumstances should they be sent back, or should they ever be sent even to the Central African Federation, as it was called. He got that assurance, you see, which in a way made it possible for this whole thing to have worked. Without that, everybody would have been sent back. If they found any of us, we'd have come straight back. I don't know what history would have made then.
And that's such a beautiful story about the importance of our African neighbors right now, and especially back then. And perhaps before we open to the audience, I want you to both to maybe just think of an anecdote, and maybe we could pass the mic around. For you, what were the, I mean, we kind of think of OR as this big man of history, you know? And I love the story that I read about him from an interview Mama Mbeki does, where he was afraid of snakes, or just the kind of everyday stuff of singing church hymns with such fervor at a school function. And maybe if you've got any other anecdotes that kind of add to the humanizing of this big man of history who did amazing things, as you're pointing out, and kind of stretched the borders for South Africa at the time. And if anything comes up, and then we're going to open to the audience maybe for some comments.
Well, I don't know about anecdotes, because that particular period was, you know, you suddenly were faced. I just qualified, and I was in a different world. Suddenly, from being a student, trying to look for legal practice, And I was suddenly plunged into this world of leaders, heads of state, and so on. Fortunately, a lot of them had been fellow students, because in London, we had an African Students Association, and whether it was demonstrating for Ruth Kama to be allowed back into, after she married Seretse, back into what was Botswana land, we were demonstrating for that, or we were demonstrating against Portuguese atrocities in Angola. As students, we had known each other and we had worked together. So this, of course, helped all of us. It helped the liberation of Southern Africa as a whole because of that link, because some of these people ended up as presidents, foreign ministers, so on and so forth. So in a way that helped because you had been demonstrating, but the next time, these are the leaders who were of Africa itself. So I think that was the kind of atmosphere, and one has to look at that. And you had to improvise. That was the important thing. You didn't have much opportunity. I know when I was trying to leave, when I left by commercial flight a few hours after telling the leadership to get to Palapi, because they'd closed down Francistown Airport. They knew Oliver was in Botswana land somewhere. They knew that technically he could not go out, or they thought he would not be able to go out by commercial flight. He'd have to go stop in the Federation. And that was their thinking. So we had to find an airstrip, Palapi, where the pilot of the charter flight told me, by the way, tell your passengers that if there are wild animals on that strip, because it's only an airstrip, they must stay in the trees and I will buzz these airstrip to chase the animals away. And, you know, this was the sort of atmosphere at that time. Of course, I was scared stiff, but that aside. But on the other hand, they were waiting. The other person who had come out was Dr. Yusuf Dadoo, head of the Indian National Congress, which allowed me. Now, my Gujarati is very poor because of where I was educated. But I had to communicate with them. And I was staying at the university in Salisbury. I asked Dr. Dadoo, or sent a message, would he phone me at 10 o'clock at night at a number, which was one of the telephone booths at the University of Salisbury. And I had to tell him that I had a press conference first, and I announced they were coming in by land. This was to divert. My journalistic friends, please forgive me, but they've never done that. I had to do that to divert attention. And as I got into that phone booth, I said, what on earth is the Gujarati name for an aeroplane? I didn't know. And the only thing I could think of was something that flew. And as I said, my Gujarati was very rudimentary. So I used the word for a very small bird.
And they got what you were saying?
Pardon?
And the message got across?
Yeah, because I had to tell them that, you know, they were not coming in by land, and they had to go to this place, and so on. And by the way, I also managed to get documents for them, certificates of identity from the government of India, which sent them down. And, you know, it's the little things that matter. Mm. I had the documents. I had told them to get pictures. I had handed all of this to the pilot who was going on the chartered flight. And I forgot to send glue to stick the pictures. It just shows you can never think of everything.
You can't think of everything, even when you're the travel agent of the ANC.
Even when I'm the
Maybe you could just hear from Mam Shope. Any anecdotes, Mam Shope?
Yeah. Maybe I should say that let me say that we started off in 1981 by going to the conference where we were told by OR to get ourselves into a secretariat so that we should be able to guide the women. And each group, each member of the secretariat guiding the women either in education and political, and also dealing with the people who are at home. So we dealt very, very much with the people at home. We used to send them messages to come to Botswana and then get on to Zambia. Yeah. So we had a conference, and then after that conference, we started to work very, very seriously. And some of us worked even in the office of the ANC in Lusaka. I recall one time, there's one officer, a Zambian officer, who was supposed to be helping us. We were trying to work out an event. So this man says, then I went to him and asked for help. He was very rude to me, but then I couldn't do anything. So I just went back to OR, who was very understanding and very, eager to help, and told him my problem, that, I could not do this because the officer could not help me. He turned red. All he said was, look, go and tell them now that if they are drunk, we can also be drunk. So I just went there slowly, and then I stood at the door of this office until this man called me, and then possibly he might have phoned him, I don't know. But then the thing was solved. The other time again that I always think of OR, where he played a very important role on a very dangerous matter, is when we were going to Botswana, to Lesotho, to bury our people who died in Lesotho. You see, those days were very difficult. The South Africans were still very, very rude and very, they commanded everything. Now, there was no other way to leave Lusaka to Lesotho. We had to go via Mozambique. So OR spoke to Samora Machel that we will be passing there, going to Lesotho. And of course, most of the ambassadors who were in Lusaka offered to go with us, to go and attend this funeral with us. Unfortunately, when we got to Mozambique, Machel said to us, he's very sorry. He cannot help us with his plane because the South Africans have just warned him that should he dare and do that, he'll bring down the plane. So he cannot do it. We know that we are leaving tomorrow, but we didn't know how, we didn't know when, and so forth. So we stayed for some time, overnight. First thing in the morning, we had a telephone call from OR saying that, get ready, we are leaving now. We must be at the airport in such and such a time. Fortunately, OR, with his very, brainy mind, he discussed with Kaunda, and he discussed with Machel to tell them our problem. And of course, Kaunda, our dear Kaunda, offered his plane to take us to Lesotho. So we were just told at such and such a time, you must be at the airport. So we went to the airport, and all the ambassadors came. We all traveled in that plane straight to Lesotho, made our work, and then came back together with them. So he had played a very, very important role. Even Machel was happy, I must say, though it embarrassed him a little.
Thanks, Mme. Any comments from the audience? I don't see any hands. Any comments, questions? You want to be part of the conversation? Can't see at the back if there's any light. Okay, think about your next question, because maybe I'm just going to pick on people. You with the red scarf, tell us what you think or something. Okay, I was a teacher. I'm allowed to do that. That's what we do. It's called cold calling. Okay, so maybe we should just shift the conversation a bit to include, I want to start with you, Manana. I'm sorry, I just went blank. I thought of your grandfather instead. And
Can I just add one
yes,
word
please.
that I forgot? I forgot to mention that Leabua in Lesotho, who was supposed to bury these people, he himself was very worried. He was sick, and he kept on saying to OR, if you are not going to help me, I'm not going to bury these people. So,
He was under a lot of pressure. Mamanana, maybe you could bring in any anecdotes and perhaps you come in from a particular vantage point, having also been from a political family, perhaps, and if you've got any anecdotes to share about the historical moment, but what also it means to you personally.
No, I wouldn't say I know OR at all, but growing up in the family, obviously, where they interacted with him, I think brings back memories of basically, for me, it's the issue of values. More than anything else, I think the people of their generation were driven by certain values that they knew were going to keep the organization going for generations. And I think it's important for us to go back to that. Those values are the things that I believe where we're actually sitting right now, even if you read the stories of these leaders, are the things that should come back to us as part of our education in the communities, if not at school. Because if we miss out on that, listen to the stories that Abomam, Shope, and Chinwala are actually talking about right now. Those are the people who understood that if they did not create a strong movement outside and had those values, bring them back through the movement, back to South Africa, we had nothing to actually build South Africa on. And I think we should be grateful for that. That's a start. And the second one is that what they understood also, and I think, again, dealing with issues of gender, is that they understood that the person is a person. It doesn't matter whether they're male or female. Give them an opportunity to thrive and you'll get the best out of them. And that's what they actually did with the women outside. And you can see that with some of the leadership that come from outside, they still stand their values in actually understanding that whatever was actually grounded in them at the time is what is going to take this country forward. And now where we are actually standing is that if we do not take the opportunity to go back and read, go back and understand where they actually created the ANC that we're actually talking about today, we are actually missing out on what made the ANC that was then. I'm talking about that ANC. I'm not quite sure about the one today. To be honest, I really don't know. But that ANC that we're talking about is the ANC that we all knew even at the time. And anywhere you go in the world, ANC had so much respect. I even remember when I was at school overseas, when we were toy-toying, even overseas as young students, you mentioned the word ANC, everybody looked around and actually understood what you were standing for. You didn't even have to explain yourself. And today you mention ANC, people just walk past. They don't even know what you're talking about because it has lost those values. Now, for me, what is important then is not just the Ubabu or Tambo, Umam Tambo. Being there as a partner who made sure that not just the OR Tambos were actually strong, but the whole movement of ANC was strong during the most difficult times in this country. You know, being a leader in your country is tough enough. I'm sure you can ask the people who are leading. But leading it when the movement is all over the country, I take my hat off to OR Tambo. And I think for those things, you start wondering, what type of education, what type of values, what type of upbringing create people like this, because they are rare. They are rare in the world. You don't find people like that. And I think we should invest a lot in those things that created the OR Tambos of the time. Now, during the current times, I'm talking about the current times now, when we're talking about us, what is it that we're actually learning from that? We knew they came back from overseas. We actually interacted with them at different times. We know what they stood for. It says to us, whatever was brought back, if it was good, let's keep it. If it was good, let's keep it. If it was questionable, maybe let's find out what actually made it questionable so that we are able to create that leadership that was not scared to actually see an equal South Africa. Today you talk about gender-based violence. They didn't know what you're talking about because they didn't believe women could actually be abused the way we're actually seeing it today. And I think it's important for us to actually understand that the values that made those people are the values that made them the leaders who understood that equality was the most important thing in this country. And I think we should actually build on that. If you start thinking 1956, the most difficult time that South Africa actually went through when they were actually building up the ANC, Amapunuwe, brutal. They killed the people in the 50s, all of those things. That is when the women were actually given the opportunity to stand on their own and start voting, even within the ANC. And I don't see why today women should actually stand back and wait for, what do you call it? Wait for somebody to tell them what to do. It doesn't make sense to me. I mean, it just doesn't. Because women should stand on their own and do, because enough has actually been done. You don't want to be actually pulled by the hand at this day and age for you to actually take leadership positions. Do that by yourself because you have enough within you to actually stand for.
I think you raised such an important point. You know, the question of values and the question of the role of women right now. And thankfully, we are seeing a few women, but unfortunately not enough, who are speaking up and are not waiting for anyone to give them permission to do that. Prini, you wanted to add something? Ma'am Shopper's got the...
Oh, give it to me. I want to, you know, we seem to be in anecdote land. And I think we need to take it more seriously, if I may say. Anecdotes are great. They're also very helpful to understand character. But let me go back, because women have a long history in this country. Black women, white women, right across the board, of activism. And if you look here, you know, I think all of you have seen this on the poster. I'll just use this. Charlotte was active in the 1890s, began, right through into 1920s and 30s. That's her. If we look at others here, on my right, we have Gertrude. What she hasn't mentioned, that she was the chief representative, I think the first woman chief representative, in Lusaka, where the main leadership of the ANC was. And I think you need to reconstruct this to include Gertrude in there. If you do a poster on travel agents, you can put me on it. But this long history, and we are our worst enemies in not proclaiming our history. We talk of this March of Women in 1955 to the Union buildings. That was the first time the African population, in this case women, marched to Pretoria and demonstrated at Pretoria. Why are we not proclaiming that?
That's a great point, and maybe we could ask Sarah, as someone who's been involved in the current student movements, maybe to respond to that.
But it is the first time that, because often delegations and all went to Cape Town, but that march was the first time at the Union buildings in Pretoria. By now you had the National Party in power. That was their base. We don't proclaim it. We don't talk about it.
Absolutely.
So we've got to start by recognizing what women have done. We should be not undermining ourselves, please, because we have a... We marched, we drove to come here through Mary Fitzgerald Square. Who was Mary Fitzgerald? How many people know she was a trade unionist? She was known as Battle Axe Mary. Sure. Okay. She was Irish. Doesn't matter. But we pass through. We don't even acknowledge her. We don't know who she is. And so on. You could go through this entire thing. But there are many, many more. So women, please have the confidence to speak out, to recognize our value, our worth, and our work.
Amen.
I think this is the problem.
Yeah.
And if we don't do so, before 94 elections, the most representative organization in South Africa was the Women's National Coalition, when we brought together women from every political party, every organization, and we worked together. We said, keep your organizations, but let us work for. And the question we put to them was very simple. Change is coming to South Africa. What do women want? And we forget that at that time, white women did not have property rights or equal marriage rights. It's after we went into the new parliament that we changed the budget, we changed a lot of the rights that even white women did not have. Why are we not proud of that? I think we should speak out, and we should acknowledge. And we produced through the coalition what we call the Women's Charter for Change, Women's Agenda for Change. It's there in 11 languages. It's the document of the coalition. How many people here even know about it?
Absolutely. And I think Thandi just wants to jump in, and I'd like Sarah as well, as kind of where are we right now in this conversation?
I mean, I think it's very interesting listening to the stories of the past. I grew up with the FEDSAW poster in my bedroom. My mother was part of the women's movement, as was my grandmother. And I think it's important that we recognize that in as much as gains have been made, I don't think we actually fully comprehend how much women of previous generations, not even that far before us, have gone through. My grandmother lived through a war and apartheid. You know, my mother lived through apartheid, and that system being not only brutal in terms of diminishing opportunity, but just diminishing dreams and dignity. And to be in a democracy now where I'm able to live my life to the full, where I can dream big, where I can claim my space, is a huge privilege. But I think we also need to recognize that that privilege is only attached to a few. And the violence that we experience on a daily basis as young black women is profound. You know, you experience structural violence as a result of poverty and inequality, social violence in our homes and our communities, institutional violence when the criminal justice system doesn't hold perpetrators of gender-based violence to account, violence on campuses and exclusion, bullets coming from police. I don't think this is the democracy or the values that were fought for. And it becomes very challenging because on the one hand, you want to be, you know, you want to believe in this beauty of this constitution that you remember so many people sacrificed for. But I think as young black women, it's become a very complicated space to navigate. I think some of the shortfalls of democracy has also been letting go of community. I can't imagine, Mashope, how you must have been able to communicate on the continent with no cell phones, with no electronics, and build a movement. We've lost our ability to manage solidarity. And I think democracy has also brought with it a lot of competition, and that's largely because of patriarchy still occupying space. So as women, we don't trust each other in the ways that I think happened in previous generations. And that for me makes me a bit sad, but it's also very inspiring to listen to the stories of our previous generations. But also I think with the young people, having shown us that it is possible to restart a movement, it's been very admirable.
Sarah, I'm not going to let you hide behind your notes. I can see you taking this in. And once you've spoken, just hand over the mic to Mashope when you're done.
Okay. So, yeah, every time everyone was speaking, I was just writing things down because I'm like, oh my God, I'm learning so much. This is actually a learning opportunity in as much as it's not a lecture. So, Frene spoke about how there's a habit of misremembering women to a point where we are here and just right across this Mary Fitzgerald Square, and perhaps no one chose to make mention of it. So I have this habit that every time I find myself in a political space, I sing. And I sing about Mamuini, I sing about Charlotte Matleke, I sing about Lillian Ngoyi, because I feel that it's very important in that space for people to know this woman. And one of my favorite songs is the fact that Winnie Mandela uzosipi bazooka. And the bazooka is contextual. If it's a bazooka that today it's a shambok and I'm going to whip men that are abusing women, then that's the bazooka Mama Winnie is going to give me. If the bazooka is actually going to be my degree certificate so that I'm able to access the workplace, then that is going to be the bazooka Mama Winnie is going to give me. You know. So this bazooka, this song is very important because this bazooka has to be handed down to us. It's not something that we'll just pick up as young girls, but it has to be handed down to us by the likes of you. It can be through knowledge, it can be through, it can be through a whole lot of things. So I'm really tempted to even sing the song right
Please
now.
do. We have time. We have time. We'll join you.
Winnie Mandela uzosiniki mama umzabalazo Gitsilili engoyi mama umzabalazo Guyeyedwa umama Guyeyedwa umama wetu Guyeyedwa umama Guyeyedwa umama wetu Githi Charlotte Maceke Githi mama umzabalazo Githi Gertrude Shope Githi mama umzabalazo Guyeyedwa ufreni Guyeyedwa umama Zanele.
Thank you. See how beautiful that was.
It's very important that we remember these women because they did so much. Right now, as I sit here, I'm thinking voting is such a basic thing that was not supposed to be afforded to women. But because I was not there, I don't know how difficult it was to not be a woman that votes. Because Umam Lindi and I'm not sure who else also mentioned the fact that women have always been active in politics, in as much as they were not there in the institutional arrangement of it, in terms of contesting positions and all those things. The labor was there. Mam Shope mentioned the fact that she was secretary and she was not paid. And that thing is constantly perpetuated in that.
Unpaid labor of
you
women.
know, women labor is not recognized, like domestic labor is not remunerated, and it needs to be. You know, all sorts of things. You writing a speech for whoever it is or editing, you need to be compensated for that. And we also need to then start recognizing the contribution that women make, because it's as though we're just, it's like, I don't even want to say it's our responsibility, but it's as though it's your job. Like it must be your job that if you are going to have a BGM or whatever, you must put up posters and then the men will come back and then fist in the air. But you were there, you printed posters, you thought of like the glue, you know, there'd be no, you know, that is labor.
That is labor.
Without the glue, then nothing is going to happen, you know.
Sure.
And I had so many points that I want to speak about in terms of, Umamnana said the fact that we need to be vocal as women and we need to stand out and we need to be heard. But many times when this happens, we are called elements. We are called elements, and we are called elements that want to divide the movement, because it's like this movement does not belong to us. So if we fight for this space, then what we seek to do is to divide it and not form a part of it. And it's silly that when we are invited in protest, and it happened with Fees Must Fall, and I'm pretty sure it happens with many things, that when we are there, you're only seen as a body. It's a body that's supposed to be a number, so that they'll see that actually it was not 200 students, as VC Habib said, it was actually 2,000, and the women were there. And we are not there because they want our voices to be heard, because I remember one of the challenges we heard in 2015, we had to forcefully and aggressively say that you're going to recognize Shaira and Nompendulo, because they rightfully belong to this protest. They are both SRC presidents, and they need to be here. We cannot have two other males that were not there when we're busy planning this thing, because that thing was planned. Fees Must Fall didn't just happen.
And then the erasure
and there's a lot of
in.
labor that came from women. So it cannot be now that it's cameras and in the front it's two men that are busy clinching their fist in the air. Nompendule had to be there. Shaira had to be there. Because at that point in time, they held political positions in the university and they had to be recognized as that. So it cannot be that the default person, when we would come to representation in protest, that has to be a man. And that we also have to fight. And then when you fight, you're told that you're being an element and all those kind of things. So I'm happy to hear that during his times, OR saw the importance of women in that we need to capacitate them. And perhaps your responsibility will be education, your responsibility will be health and all those kind of things. But we don't see that capacitation happening now. It can never be that someone shows up. If the month is not August, there's no man that's going to show up and say, I want to empower you with this. It gets tiring that the only time our voices want to be heard and the only time men want to be seen doing good is when it's the month of August.
Amen.
It's tiring that the Women's League is also now becoming a thing that gets used to advance politics of the men. It's like, it's...
And I think that's a great point to open up to the audience to hear about that positionality. When and how do we have these conversations at the right time? And Thandi, you want to jump in, and then we're going to open to the audience?
Sorry, I just wanted to say, the issue that Sarah raises about capacity, skills capacity. If you're in the policy-making environment today, and I go to meetings all the time, the majority of people are older and they are male. And so the same policies that were made 20 years ago are being made again. And we excluded from spaces as kind of being experts in a field. And I think that's something that everyone needs to be held accountable for. I think we also need to reimagine what women's spaces look like and what women's issues are. We can't only be speaking about gender-based violence as though it's not a policy issue, or I don't know, rape or these things that seem to only affect women. They're an outcome of a structural flaw in our society. And it's policies that have been perpetuated that cause structural violence. So men as policymakers actually need to have the understanding of what the outcomes of their weak policies are going to be.
Women have to assert them.
But
Don't wait for the men. That is the point. No, space is there. You have to fill it. Space is not itself gender in any way. Unless women fill that space, we're not going to change much.
I want to agree.
I want to come back to OR for
I want to agree. Yeah.
He not only had policy, but he always understood the need for structures and organization to implement. So it was not enough to say equality, but then he appointed people. He appointed people, and at an occasion when he announced to a group of us that a woman was going to go and be representing the ANC in a Western country which was very friendly to the ANC. And he announced it, and the ambassador designate burst into tears. And he turned to her and he said, "Wrong. You cannot do that. If you don't have confidence in yourself, when the ANC has confidence in you, you are not fulfilling your role as an ANC member." Yeah, but also that he would appoint somebody like that. Gertrude was being modest. Lusaka was effectively our headquarters for a long time. She was our first chief representative there. So that the point is, he appointed. At one stage, I was heading the oil boycott movement in London, stopping oil going into South Africa. And we had an Iranian revolution. The Shah of Iran and that government owned part of oil refinery, Natref, as it then was. Okay? There was a revolution in Iran. Suddenly, Ayatollah Khomeini's son invited the ANC delegation to come and visit them. I was called in by OR saying, "You have to go." And I said, given what was happening at that stage in Iran, I said, is it wise to send a woman? And very sternly OR said, the ANC will decide who represents it. No one will tell us. And he not just understood politics and the policies we needed, but he set up structures. And this we must never forget. He set up mainly ANC structures had commissions of inquiry. But what did Oliver set up? He set up Commission for the Emancipation of Women. in the ANC. He then went further, you see. He appointed men and women. When we went after one of our conferences, where we decided we wanted him to chair that commission, mainly to emphasize the importance of it, we went to him and said, please, would you chair it? Because this is the best way to illustrate that it is a policy. He agreed, and he played an important role in that commission.
No, I just wanted to agree with the first sentiment that said women must step in. Guys, it's time women stepped into the space. You know, actually, the world is not going to open up for you any more than it has already done. Let's be very fair. It's just the way it is. If you want something, go and get it now. You know what I liked with what Sarah just said? She said, they'll call us elements. Okay, we are elements. Let's own the word. We are elements. Let's own every word they call us. No leader gets it with cheers all the time. You walk into that space, you take the power, you do it, and the world observes that. That's how it works. Absolutely. If ANC had waited for Ramaphosa to hand over, guys, do you know where we would be today? Do you understand? There had to be pressure from somewhere for emancipation to actually happen. There is so much that the other person can do for you. But if you do not stand up on your own, it's not going to happen, believe me. That's why I'm proud of the people like Makosi Khoza. Makosi, no, truly, they champion a cause for women because they're not waiting for other people to clap hands for them. We call them elements until we call them heroes. That's how it works. So all of us, when we want something, we have to step into it, walk into it, take it and walk. Because you are not doing anything wrong. You are doing it for the benefit of all other people. Those women in 1956, when they did that, they were scared to death. They could have been killed. But they knew that when they did that, it was going to actually make a difference. In 2009, most of you know nothing about Women Forward. There was a women party that was actually there. We were trying to demonstrate, we knew we were not going to win. But we're demonstrating the fact that women can form their own political party where they can actually chart their own agenda. I don't have to wait for anyone else to go to somebody else to tell me to form a political party. No. You decide on your own as women to say, enough is enough. Because if you do not take it, no one is going to give it to you. That we have to understand from here onwards.
Absolutely, yeah.
I just want to add to what my friend has just said. You see, women have got so much power, but they don't use it. If you sit down to think properly, you'll find that it's okay, the ANC was formed years back, but in 1954, the women of South Africa, across color, came together and formed what we called the Federation of South African Women. It's very strong. It helped us a lot because it brought in everybody. Bob Black says they were strong enough to go and even put flowers when Steve Biko was killed. That was not the only time. The Freedom Charter came, I mean the treason trial came, it also had women whom we still honor up to today. But it meant that women had to go in to stand up and be counted. Because if we stand up to be counted, men will always, they'll help us. Some of them will come and they will help us. You know, there's an international women's organization called the WIDF, Women's International Democratic Federation. It helped us with one sentence and one sentence only. This was during the Cold War. They used to say, women as mothers who give life to this world have got a duty to see to it that this life is preserved and protected. Now, Tina Gelana, it's okay. We are still learning. We are coming up with our parties. We are not enemies. I'm sorry to say that we are not enemies with different parties. We just have a different way of doing things. I require time. Somebody asked me a question. I can't remember what the question was, but my answer was, you know what? I've been to an Anglican school. I've been to a Roman Catholic school. I've been to quite a number of different schools, but to me, all I wanted was education.
Absolutely.
Now, we tend to become too pure. I'm sorry to use this word, but I want it to land. We are too pure. You know, if you are pure, you know, if you can make a mistake, for instance, like me, my daughter is in COPE. I mean, in the ANC. But because we are not enemies, she arranges even to come here. People don't know me. They talk to her if they want me to go anywhere else or for me to do anything else. So I'm saying, women, let's come together. We have our different parties. I want to repeat, we are not enemies. But we can keep our parties. There's nothing wrong with that. But when it comes to issues that bring life to the world.
That's true. We're not enemies. Yeah, we're not enemies. Sarah, and then any questions from the audience? I haven't seen any hands yet. I see a hand over there. 2. Any others? 3. Okay, so I gave you a number. Number 1, number 2. Oh, okay, we'll start here, seeing as the mic is already here, and then come to you, sir, and then come to you, ma'am.
Good afternoon. My name is Ubi Kanyukekana. I'm a law student.
All right, that was, of course, the live proceedings from right here at the Market Theatre in Newtown. And that was the Women's Month dialogue. And you saw there an array of ladies, both young and old. We called it the cross-generational discussion of women tabling some of the issues that they grew up going under or facing as young women. And, of course, we heard from the youth of today. What do we suffer from as women today? We heard about things like how Oliver Tambo was the first male in the ANC, of course, to lead the struggle in the emancipation of women. We heard about the role that women played in, of course, the liberation struggle. Let me just take you through some of my guests today. The panelists, they comprise of Gertrude Shope and Efren Genwala. Now, these two were the veterans of this discussion, and these two having had close relationships with Oliver Tambo, giving us their life stories and, of course, shared some of their fondest memories as to what kind of man Oliver Tambo was. Now, these women were basically telling all of us and other women out there to stand up for your rights, talk about the struggles that you're going to, talk to people about some of the challenges that you are faced with in your daily life. I mean, the president was talking this afternoon about the fact that 21 years after democracy, yet women are still the ones that are likely to live below the poverty line. What has been done? So this was just the debate that was taking place here at Market Theatre. You can catch the rest of it on SABC News online, of course. We are out of time out here in Newtown. I'm Alicia Jali. Thank you so much for joining us.
Sisimanga setompasi, esaqinile lonke. Sisimanga setompasi, esaqinile lonke. Sisimanga setompasi, esaqinile lonke. Sisimanga setompasi, esaqinile lonke.
We can be able to update these things to say you did not issue summons. What then? How do I know as a mother not to appear and not take leave? Because you're wasting my days.
Absolutely.
You know, can we get there eventually?
Absolutely. So I think that the two major things is what are the values that kept you, Frini, going and kept you going, Mam Chopin? What keeps you going, Mam Nana, in the spaces that you've occupied and that you constantly occupy? And what does it mean to have a woman president? I think that's coming up a lot. And who is supporting this idea of a woman president, and why are we still, I guess, talking about, you know, is it a problem to have a woman president?
Why do we want to say woman president or man president? I don't see a reason for that. We need a good president, and we should vote for a good one. We don't want demonstrations. We want action. A woman, president, would understand the problems of women to a greater extent. Men in power are usually oblivious to the problems. But it's up to women to make sure, on the ground, not only as a president, of what's really affecting women today. And I think that is important. So let us make sure we vote for a good president, regardless of what they are. Hopefully, it'll be women, but not overnight and not all the time.
Oh, I see. Oh. Well, as I said, you know, we come from a very, very long way. But I want to say, there's this very, very simple way of expression which says a person is a person because of another person. You can't do anything alone. You need, we can't just come here as a panel and sit, you know, and hope to sit and talk when there's nobody else to come and listen. And we can't have many people to come and listen if they will just come and sit and look at us without taking what we are going to say. I'm saying we should please come together, discuss matters as we are doing, ask questions, but to improve ourselves. We are not improving an individual. We are thinking of quite a number of other people. I want to go back to the question of women. Shortly before we came back home, there were quite a number of doctors, sports people, and so forth. They were sending delegations to go and speak to the ANC, so that, you know, preparing us for coming together. Fortunately, we were also given that chance. We had women who left here, including from the National Party, Women for Peace. That's why I respect women so much. They came there. We met in Zimbabwe, actually. Well, of course, naturally, the first day was a little bit tense because we didn't know each other. We didn't know how to look at each other. But after we were introduced, and after we were told our mission, and after we were told that nobody else can do it but ourselves, we sat down to be very, very frank with each other. That is what we agreed to do. She was there. So we spoke with each other very, very frankly, but fortunately, we were not using vulgar language. We were just being very frank, as the word frank is. We discussed very, very big issues. We discussed very, very sensitive issues about their husbands killing us and us doing what to them, you know. But because we had made up our minds to be very straightforward and simple and frank, we carried on very well. So much so that on the last day, or let me say the night before we left, I think ambassadors were also, of course, seeing, you know, keeping quiet and listening as to what are we doing and what are our steps. One ambassador, who happened to be coming from Cuba at that time, made a very big dinner for the delegation before we went home tomorrow. It was going to be anybody who wants. If you didn't want, you were not forced to go there. I'm telling you, when we told our friends from South Africa, especially the white women, everybody was keen to go. And we all went there, and we all enjoyed. We danced, we did everything. But what was, again, very, very important is that on the last day, now when we were saying at 12 o'clock, we must all get into, those who are going back to South Africa must get into their transport back to the airport. Those who are coming from different parts of the world, that is the ANC people, must get into their whatever transport to see to it that everybody's going. One woman said, I want that we should finish off with a song. She first sang, she started it. What was her name?
Sorry, I don't remember.
You don't know the name? Oh, anyway. She started off by singing, We Shall Overcome. That's a white woman. These are the women who have been going to Pretoria, who have been going to Lancaster House to harass South African authorities who had gone there. These are the women who were standing outside the city hall in the evenings with their black sash, showing that, they are in solidarity with us. Women, as people who bring life to this world, have got a duty to see to it that this life is preserved and protected. Shortly before I stop, I'm reminded by one woman. We were in Lusaka. At times you got papers when they were 3 weeks old, but to us, that was news. I was reading one paper. When I opened this paper, I can't remember exactly whether the Star or what. There's a young chap, about 8 years, if you can guess, lying next to the road, covered with a blanket. There's a woman sitting next to him. She doesn't know him because somebody said, how? Who is this woman? Who is this child? I came up police because they wanted to take notes and write down. They went to her and then they said, who is this child? I don't even think that she knows how to speak English. She said in Zulu, it was written in Zulu, "Andimazi mntwanami." Our tradition does not allow that a mother can just pass a child who's dead without anybody looking after that child. And therefore, I had to go home, take a small blanket just to cover him and sit with him until those who want him should come and take him away. Now, I'm repeating the question of a mother. The last thing I'm going to say, talk about when the question of the mother is that when we came home, when we were all happy, as we were saying, when we got home and then we were now starting to sober down, when the talks were going on, we were also invited to go and take part with our men at the, what were we discussing? Yeah, that's right, at Kodesa. We took part, anyway, it's all right, we did that. But what was very, very important is that immediately after that, the women came together regardless of color of hair or what. We came together and then we said, we want to have what we call a charter for women's rights. That is how all the South African women have got one document, a charter for women's rights of all the women of South Africa.
That's a very beautiful point.
For change. Thank you.
And those values, again, I'm just moving from the discussion that Omar have just had, were being inculcated in what was called South African Women in Dialogue. It happened, somehow it died. I don't think we should allow it to die, girls, because South African Women in Dialogue did this. It actually embedded all those values. You cannot go to sleep if her child is not sleeping. You can't. If her child is hungry, you cannot go to sleep. Isawid was inculcating that. Isawid said, South African women are going to discuss their problems on their own, intergenerationally, be able at their levels, wherever they are, to be able to seek solutions that she's talking about. She's not the only one facing that problem. There are millions of young women now who feel they have to fight on their own, which is unfair. There is absolutely no way, as Omar just said right now, siyabantu ngabanye abantu. So we cannot lose that because Omar Mbeki worked very hard at making sure that Isawid actually worked. And I think we should demand that Isawid comes back because it was allowing people who were community-based people and leaders, community-based. Right now we are talking about, they said, you know, what is Pali, is actually resigning after 17 years of work. I was very saddened when I saw that. But then when he read the statistics, I understood why he resigned. You cannot work for so many years and discover that you have more poor people than you had in 1994. Yeah. It doesn't make sense. And the majority of those people are women, African women in our own communities, guys. And then we go around saying that there is democracy. It doesn't make sense. Therefore, it says to us, If we do not go back to the structures that we created at the time, if we do not come back to the institutional policies that are in place to address the very same problems, we are talking, it's actually a lie.
Yeah.
You know what we're doing here is a lie.
Yeah.
Until we do it at community level, guys, I think we're actually wasting our time. We understand we're within a patriarchal structures, and it's patriarchy, my child. My child, is patriarchy that is keeping you unaware of your problems and answering your problem. It touched me. It's patriarchy because I don't know how a person goes to sleep knowing that his child has not eaten. I just don't understand. But what is important is that it says to us, as women, we must support her and many girls like her to make sure that things like that don't continue, because we are perpetuating poverty over and over again, and we cannot continue doing that because the values of the women like her made sure that we understood that umuntu ngabantu. And also we were actually talking that language, and I think that thing actually has to come back for us to actually make sure that women continue with this conversation beyond these panels that are on television. Life is worse out there in the communities.
That's a powerful point, Mamnana. You're going to respond from your position.
I just want to add to that, to say that, I think it's important that women continue to fight for space, political space, not just activism, because I think similarly as to what we see in the US, it was women that led Black Lives Matter, and now it's become such a force within the US. I think the same thing happened here with Fees Must Fall, but I think we also need to be fighting for space within our governance and administration structures. Thank you. Because that is where implementation is problematic, and why women's needs are forgotten, and why your court administration doesn't work, because no one in the court needs to take care of your kid, right? So I think it's important that we train and that we understand the importance of skills development, of capacity building, of beyond just studying, masters in gender, also applying that to masters in public policy and ensuring that we intern in our state institutions. I think sometimes that's also seen with a bit of hesitance, but that's actually where we need to be. We need to be in spaces of power that actually do implementation in order to change the structures that we currently see today.
Ma'am.
Okay. Sarah's going to make a comment, and then I see the two hands. Yes. 3.
Okay, before I lose my train of thought, because I've just been jotting down notes everywhere. So firstly, I wanted to add on what has been said about us as women. I don't want to use the word forcefully, but deliberately wanting to belong to political spaces. And in our wanting to belong to these political spaces, it must be that we work towards, and also the people that we find there, which are normally men, they need to help us to make these spaces women-centered spaces. For example, you find that we need to have a meeting. And because you're a woman, and perhaps you're a mother, and maybe a wife, or whatever it is, because of your domestic responsibilities, you find it difficult to be active in other aspects. If we are going to have a meeting at 6 p.m. and we know that kids normally leave school at 4 p.m., we must say that women must bring their kids to the meeting. These spaces need to be enabled for women to participate fully, and it cannot be that we are saying that women don't come to meetings and you don't look at the reason why they don't come to meetings. They don't come to meetings because domestic responsibilities are not shared between men and women. It's always the responsibility of the woman to take care of the kids, to make sure that the kids are fed that night and all those kind of things. When at that point in time, roles can be exchanged to say, you stay at home with the kids and I'm going to go to the meeting. Or if the meeting requires both of us, then all of us are going to go to that meeting. And it needs to be a norm. It needs to be okay that kids are able to attend meetings with their parents and kids are able to attend meetings with their mothers. I also want to speak on the fact that there's often there's this stereotype that you need to sort of like feed into as a woman, that when you find yourself as a young woman or old, who's single, who's unmarried, and perhaps not a Christian, you're not accepted very much. You become very marginalized because you're not actually abiding to the norms of what a woman is supposed to look like. And that is quite hard for us because we like to express ourselves differently. I do not think I'm a typical woman sitting here, and I don't think each and every woman sitting in this room is the same as me. And those kinds of identities of women need to be allowed to exist because we are not one type of person. It cannot be, and it's the same thing with men. There's not one type of men. I want to respond to this to the question that was raised about Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma, because I'm a feminist, and firstly, I want to say that it's important that we say we want a woman president, in the same way we say Black Lives Matter. Because if we say lives matter, then it means all lives are equal, and they are not. And when we speak of leaders, default assumption is that it's a man. And it's very important that we actually specifically say that this is what we mean when we say we want a woman leader. Because if we say we want a leader, we are not, today is not the time when we say leader, and then whatever that comes to people's minds is both male and female. Like, society is still socialized in a manner that when we say leader, they think of a man. That's why you even have petty things like when you say you want to do something, and what is happening to Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma at national politics, that every time she says something, she's referred to in reference to her ex-husband. It happens to us even in high school and in university spaces and all those kind of things, that when you get up and you say, I want to contest chairperson of this branch, you're told that you slept with who and who and who. Mm-hmm. How is that taking away from who I am as a leader? Yeah. You know, yeah. So that's why it's important that we say, in as much as we say we want a black person, it's also important that we say we want a woman person. Because if we don't say that, then we're going to erase and we're going to marginalize all these other people that have been constantly and perpetually removed from participating in spaces that we exist in.
Thanks, Sarah. I just want to give one last round of audience. So I saw 2 hands and there was a third one there. I'm not sure if I can, oh, now there are more. 1, 2, 3 for now.
Good evening. My name is Angie Makwetla. I am from the South African Human Rights Commission. And I want to pose a question to Gertrude and to Frini. Did the Truth and Reconciliation Commission go far enough? Because there is something worrying me. I see a lot of walking wounded people. And I believe that the walking wounded will always look for others to wound. Why is it that we have so much gender-based violence, horrific cases of gender-based violence, horrific cases of child abuse? Just today, I received a case of a child, because I look after children's rights at the Human Rights Commission, a child that is deaf, that was locked in a storeroom, and the parents went to look for the child and couldn't find the child, and eventually when the child was found, they discovered that the child has been abused over and over again. What is happening? The children on the Cape Flats that are being raped and killed daily. Should we not sit down and go right back to basics? Madiba talked about the reconstruction and development of the soul. We did not go back to say, what are the wounds that have been caused by these systems that we were exposed to?
Thank you,
Our brothers, our sisters went to exile, they came back. Did we ever sit down and say, let us sit down and talk about healing? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ma.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. Abantu abadala nyabulisa mama, the audience nyabulisa. I am the woman who actually faced human rights violation. I am a married woman with 7 children, married to a politician, caught up in the middle of politics because I'm from the royals. Used us in a human trafficking way because they want to govern with our blood, with our body parts. As I speak now, this is a sensitive issue. I face poison in our food, whereby we're supposed to be sacrificed because of the politics that I don't know where I fit in. I grew up in Northwest. I don't know anything about politics. I know nothing about really politics, let me just put it like that. My children were being cut off. whereby I look at my husband telling me that this is a custom, this is our tradition, this is the thing that I have to believe that if I do A plus B with the children, I will actually thrive. You know, they've done things secretly, but because my God and my ancestors were there for me, I survived. I raised my voice. My voice was never heard. I am not talking here to impress anyone. I am here because I am paining. With the case that I'm having, reporting it to human rights, they swept it under the carpet till today. I raised my voice. I went to gender equality. I went to legislature because I had to come up with a solution to say if you want to govern in life, you want to be rich, work. I'm a community caregiver, whereby I fed the destitute, people who pick up the food from the dustbin. I decided not to wine and dine with my friends. Christmas time, make food for them. Holidays, make food for them. And Woolworths supported me with all their hearts. Then I saw the number escalating, whereby I feed the poor. And there comes somebody who is very clean. You can see this person has a shelter, water to bath, but doesn't have a job. I fed families to bring change. I didn't stay there. Out of my pocket, I had to stand up and use my mind that I'm not going to rely on this man because he doesn't want to pay the school fees for the children. He doesn't want to buy food for the children because of the belief system, the religion that I cannot criticize today, and they call it tradition. And it's been avoided. I came with economic transformation, more business model. I was given money. The money disappeared.
Thank you for sharing your story.
I never received not even a cent. But Mama, I need your help. Oliver Tambo gave you an opportunity to thrive. I should think I will run with a foundation like the leader like him. I am Matsidiso Mashinini. The story is very hectic.
It's a very sensitive story.
Actually fought for education. And yet my children had to stay at home, not going to school. I had to fight with the Department of Education, whereby they couldn't fit my children in the local schools because they were in their private schools. My children were being affected drastically, and yet they are straight A students.
I think that's a very sensitive story,
It's a sensitive story. Today I am going to, because I want to understand what is tradition, what is custom. The belief that makes a man to actually cut us while we're sleeping. The boys don't have the testosterone. What is this?
And I think this is a good space if there are people who can support you to come and speak to you. Thank you so much for sharing.
During Heritage Day, I am going to collaborate with the SWAF, Southwest and African Forum. Those are the people that I need to understand. What is our culture? And these people are foreigners in collaboration with Mr. Ntate Jonas Gwangwa family, because I need answers. I really need answers.
Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you so much for sharing. And I think just in the interest of time, we're just maybe going to take one last round of comments. I know people have hands, and the unfortunate thing is that Nkolo used to say, but the time is the enemy, unfortunately. So thankfully, there's time to have a chat afterwards. Please stick around, come speak to the people up here, make connections. But I think it's one of those Western things. Time is an issue, and we all need to get home. So I'm just going to take maybe one last round of comments if people would like to comment to those contributions.
I'd just like to say that I think these spaces are important, and I do think we need to revive them. I think just the story shared tonight demonstrate that there's a dire need for women to come together more often. And I think the foundations perhaps need to consider doing this more often. And also being in spaces where women from different walks of life are able to come together in a way that did happen quite frequently leading up to the 56 March. I think we need to remember our history a bit more clearly. Thank you.
I want to repeat what I said at the beginning about that Oliver Tambo was a leader who not only made speeches, not only talked about ideas, encouraged policies, but very, very, very importantly, he then set up structures and systems to enable those policies to be implemented. I would go so far as to say this may be one of our biggest failings if we look at yesterday's releases about the statistics of South Africa. We may have brilliant policies, but implementation is a problem. Secondly, and this I speak directly to women, because it concerns us, and as long as that happens, responsibility is on women to change it. Why is it that the lowest paid professions in the hierarchy of job evaluation are those of women? If we stopped talking about equal pay for equal work in the abstract, which is what we do, and change that to equal pay for work of equal value. Now, in countries where that has now been implemented, there has been a 30% increase in GDP. So perhaps we should start evaluating. And very briefly, in the province of Ontario in Canada, for example, every company employing more than, I think it's 100 or 150 people, has to put up a range of pay for the different jobs. Okay? And in the European Union, that is being brought about. In countries where that has been brought, as I said, it's raised the lowest paid jobs by 30% and the GDP by 30%. Because women's work, who are the lowest paid? Domestic workers, nurses, teachers. So if we really want to change dramatically the conditions of the poor, the dispossessed of this country, then we have to move towards that. So I can supply information to everybody else, but we need to start doing basic fundamental restructuring. All very well to talk of radical economic transformation. That is the basic transformation we need in the values-based system of this country.
Sarah, Mam Shope, would you like to respond? Mam Nana?
Okay. Wow, it's actually, there's so much to talk about, but I'm just going to try and be brief. What I want to speak on mostly, it's the conversation about the empowerment of women. Many a times when you're told that you're being empowered, they also want to tell you how they are going to empower you without looking into maybe what kind of empowerment you want. That's why people are always in a rush to fill in a quota system instead of putting people in places where they want to be. And when I say this, I say this from a position of a staunch feminist in that
wathi makhosikazi manyanani wamemeza umamuslinga wathi makhosikazi manyanani sisimanga setompasi esaqinile izwe lonke sisimanga setompasi esaqinile izwe lonke sisimanga setompasi esaqinile izwe lonke sisimanga setompasi esaqinile izwe lonke.
About how society is and not necessarily.
1 2 1 2 1 2. You happy? Okay, so can I now go inside? You say it is a wrap, eh? So we're going to unplug everything, lights, the whole works. Okay, cool. Okay, leave the lights first, but the other stuff is a wrap. Okay, cool. Yebo.
Don't have words.